partnership as our
Exactly. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about myself too, just to give you kind of context of where I'm coming from and my perspective. So Minnesota Housing Partnership has, I would consider three broad functions. One is policy advocacy or legislative advocacy, two is research and data, and three is technical assistance and capacity building. And we do lots of work in greater Minnesota and rural communities. We focus both on, our main focus, or a lot of our attention is spent on rental housing, and then we do some work around and research around home ownership. My particular job is to oversee the policy team, and my focus is on state legislative policy. We have another person who focuses on federal policy, and then our executive director who does some of the regional Met Council policy work. So as I look at these questions, I'm answering it from that really high level, broad perspective, and so I'll start there. Also, my background is I started as, I have a policy and law background, and I actually started as an organizer in college. I didn't realize that you could actually be an organizer as a job, but once I graduated, the people actually paid me to organize. And so my background is in grassroots organizing. I've worked on campaigns, and then I've also worked in a lot of Southeast Asian immigrant communities, organizing folks to actually go out and vote. I worked against English-only campaigns, and also helped, Senator Mimoa, the first Hmong American senator in Minnesota, get elected. Then I worked on a campaign for the first Vietnamese American woman to become city council in San Jose. So my background is really doing lots of campaigning and organizing. And when I think about, and also working in communities of color and trying to push the issue of racial justice and racial equity. So my take on this issue will really be from that perspective. In terms of affordable housing, I'm actually really new to the affordable housing world. And until I started doing this work, I was so focused on just these terms of racial justice and racial equity, and I didn't realize how intimately intertwined housing is related to racial justice and equity. If you drive around the metro area, you would see that you drive from a poor community to extremely rich, wealthy community into another like moderate income, low income community, and so on and so forth. And then it just so happens that these communities are also based on the social class of the community. They're also heavily populated with communities of color. And so, like Xiong mentioned earlier, this doesn't just happen by happenstance. It's actually policy based, kind of sorting of communities, and then ultimately becomes race-based. So I think one of the things that particularly I wanted to address is, this audience may be very metro, but because MHP does a lot of work in greater Minnesota, and I've traveled around the state this summer to hear about multiple issues around housing issues in different communities, both here in the metro and then in greater Minnesota. And you probably won't be shocked to hear this, but there is a growing number of folks of color in greater Minnesota. And these communities, many immigrants and low-income people of color are moving out to greater Minnesota for jobs, right? But they move to these communities, they don't have a strong community base because they're probably like, if they're lucky, there's 20 or 30 families. If they're not lucky, what ends up happening is their families stay in the metro area and they commute to Austin or Worthington or wherever they can get a factory job or a kind of decent paying job for people who are low skilled or identified as low skilled. And so they're really isolated in these communities. They live in really dilapidated housing or poor housing, but not necessarily affordable housing or low income housing. And so what happens is they don't even have any organizations or folks to be able to advocate on their behalf. And they live like this. And so one of the things that MHP is looking at is developing a research study to look at the housing needs of communities of color in the metro area, then hopefully expanding it to greater Minnesota area. So we can really evaluate what are good administrative and or legislative policies that should be implemented to help low-income communities in general, but in particular looking at what's impacting folks of color in greater Minnesota. And so I just wanted to, I think, in particular, focus on that because we recently went to Austin. There's a large immigrant population that's working in the poultry plants out there. And what we're seeing that's happening is their families are staying during the week here in the metro area in either public housing or more affordable housing. And then they're commuting 2-3 hours with a group of men. So it ends up all the fathers of the households or the men of the household travel to their jobs, and they either commute daily back and forth, or they stay there for a week and live in a one-bedroom apartment all together just to save on costs, right? And this kind of standard of living is probably not the way you kind of raise healthy families or families where there's a lot of, you never see the head of household, and the only time you get to be together is on the weekends, just because you're trying to make ends meet, and also you want some, financial flexibility, and the cost that you pay for that is being able to travel really far for the job that you're able to get. So I wanted to highlight that as an issue that MHP is working on, and then I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the legislative proposals that are coming out this session. MHP is working on some what we are terming workforce housing needs in greater Minnesota, and I don't know if many of you heard this morning, but the House Majority Leader, the House Majority, Speaker Dowd announced that workforce housing is going to be a key issue for the Republican caucus in the House, which is really great news because in greater Minnesota, they are, and also in the metro area, but a little bit different challenges in the greater Minnesota area. They are struggling with being able to house employees because employees don't even have the actual infrastructure to have anywhere to go. So people are staying in hotels for months on end and or driving or commuting in 45 to an hour away just for their jobs. So MHP is working on workforce housing, and we're also looking at the specific housing needs of racial communities. And if you have any questions, you can ask me later.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Glidden. I am one of the council members for the city of Minneapolis. So thanks for letting me be here today. We have some big questions. I'm trying to focus a little bit on what I know the most, perhaps. Just a little bit about me. Before I was on the city council, I was a lawyer. I worked on civil rights cases and employment cases as a workers' rights lawyer. And then I got elected to the city council in November of 2005, so I've been serving on the council since 2006. The past 4 years, one of the things that I did on the city council is I chaired the committee where we address both regulatory issues, which includes rental housing licenses and things like that, as well as energy and environment issues. And so it was through that work chairing that committee that I really got an opportunity to be part of the conversation, both around housing and some of the holes in how Minneapolis addresses some of our housing need issues, as well as what came to be the Clean Energy Partnership. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the Clean Energy Partnership right now, because I think the story I want to tell is about really a learning I had as a policymaker about the power of influence, of organizing, as well as boards that were very impactful to our work. So Xiong, you already get a nice introduction, but I actually want to highlight a couple things that she mentioned, because this work really starts back on the city's work to develop a climate action plan. And this climate action plan has now been adopted for a couple of years, but it was at least a year in development. And one of the subcommittees that came to be, it wasn't one of the original proposed committees to develop the climate action plan, so I want to make that point as well, was this environmental, I think it was called Environmental Justice Subcommittee. And there's some people in this room that were part of that, but it was a very highly engaged group, and they really They asked to be part of the plan development. They fought to be part of the plan development. They were part of the plan development as an official subcommittee, and then very much influenced the end product. And we now, every time that we talk about energy issues, it is rare that you don't hear sort of a corollary to environmental justice frame, and race as a part of that. So they really helped frame the work and influence the work, and that in turn also influences what items are prioritized and what then gets on work plans and how the work gets done. So I want to thank them for that. We adopted our climate action plan, and it was shortly after that that a lot of organizing energy in the community turned to the fact that we were about to have an opportunity in the city of Minneapolis to address what had been 20-year franchise agreements with Excel and Centerpoint. And this is not unusual, I guess I will just point out, across Minnesota that communities like Minneapolis have had these very, very long-term franchise agreements. 20 years actually isn't unusual, as I understand it, with other communities. And what the broader community really asked us at the city to do is take a harder look at this, ask some very hard questions about, is this the right framework for moving forward? And this is where we started to have a big public discussion about municipalization of energy and what may be our other options to achieve certain goals. So I just want to say it's not municipalization, at least in my opinion, for municipalization's, sake, but to achieve certain goals. Some of those were about energy efficiency focus, renewables focus, but also about local control and some other issues like that. So that organizing energy led to this clean energy partnership that you're hearing about right now, which is a first-in-nation model for a new way to work with utilities. Along the way, we ended up having a report done. It's called the Minneapolis Energy Pathways Study. So I have a copy here. You can get it online as well. And one of the committees in the city that's an established board, it's called the Community Environmental Advisory Committee. It's CEED is the acronym. I always think of CEED. Shalini is actually one of the members of that committee. They were also very influential in giving their opinions about what should happen to change our framework in Minneapolis around energy usage, and that we don't just do the same old thing as we have always done, which is just re-sign a franchise agreement to do the same kind of thing. So we had a lot of pressure, the policymakers, from the community, from boards that advise the city, and this was very, very influential to what ended up being the product of having this clean energy partnership. We are right now about to do a couple of significant things that I think relate to what you're talking about right here. So the city is about to appoint its formal board members to the Clean Energy Partnership. The board members will be policymakers. They will be the mayor, 2 council members. I think we may also appoint an alternate council member as well as our city coordinator. The 2 energy franchise holders, Centerpoint and Excel, will also appoint members to the board. There will be an advisory board that is also established to interact with and advise the board of the Clean Energy Partnership. The full composition of that has not yet been determined. I know we have a letter, I think from SEAC, that recommends we have at least 12 members on there. We had a lot of public comment to the city council saying the board, the advisory board, should really reflect the diverse interests within the city of Minneapolis. And so a lot of public comment on this. We have not made those appointments yet. That will be an opportunity to engage in this Clean Energy Partnership. One of the first tasks of the Clean Energy Partnership Board will be to approve a work plan. So the point of the Clean Energy Partnership is that there will be prioritized issues to work on between the city and the franchise holders, and that we will commit to working on those, and these relate to what was in the Climate Action Plan, for which there was this Environmental Justice Subcommittee that influenced what's in that plan. And I can tell you, I don't know exactly because the board has not yet voted on this, but I will be shocked if multifamily housing energy issues is not at the top of that list. So I think that is going to be a primary issue of focus of the Clean Energy Partnership from the get-go. The city as well has been very interested in this concept of the green zones, and it is in our climate action plan to work on these green zones, and we have had our staff doing significant research on that. My anticipation as well is we will see green zones as an influencer for how we work in certain areas around the city through the Clean Energy Partnership. So I think there is a lot of opportunity. I think there's huge crossover with what is likely to come up as a focus of work of the Clean Energy Partnership and what you're talking about here today. And I think you have a great opportunity, frankly, to influence the conversation of the work that will be done. So thank you.
I'm Kathy Wetzel-Mastel. I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit housing developer based in South Minneapolis. And I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm really excited to hear folks talk about being intentional about making investment in low wealth communities and communities of color. The field of affordable housing is one that is very resource constrained. So as a developer of affordable housing, we always think about what impacts can we have with these dollars. And so our mission as a nonprofit is to create affordable housing, but we also try to think, what else can we achieve with these same dollars? Can we improve communities? Can we address the disparity gap in the rate of home ownership? Can we improve the quality of housing stock? So I'm really happy to hear about the initiatives at the city and elsewhere that are really thinking about taking dollars and targeting them for multiple benefit to low-income communities. Just to back up on the affordable housing piece, you know, there's a huge unmet need for affordable housing, and one part of that, one part of the solution is housing that has public funding in it, and that funding can come from the federal government, usually via HUD, or from the state of Minnesota, or from the city of Minneapolis, or from Hennepin County. And I'm happy to report to this group that those units, the units that are created that have some public subsidy, at least in the state of Minnesota, are highly efficient. We've got a standard here that we build or renovate to called Minnesota Green Communities. And it's really thinking about not only the climate, but I think primarily what are the operating costs of this housing, because as was pointed out earlier, you've got your check that you send to your landlord every month or to your mortgage company, and that's only a fraction of your housing costs. You've got this energy cost on top of it. And so if folks are fortunate to live in one of the units that has public dollars involved, they can be reasonably assured that their ongoing operating costs are going to be lower than the typical unit they might find in that same community. I thought the maps you shared earlier were great to say, you know, there's been lots of programs out there geared at increasing energy efficiency and weatherizing units, but they go to the households who arguably need them the least. They go to the higher income households who are able to get a loan or who have the cash in the bank to finance those improvements using the rebate from Excel or Centerpoint, and you know, I'm one of those. I got a rebate from Centerpoint to replace my furnace, which I'm not complaining about, but I could have probably figured that out without that. One of the things that I think is really exciting about this conversation is that we've got all of this other affordable housing, the affordable housing that doesn't have public subsidy in it. And I think there's a great opportunity here as we have all the policymakers talking about being more intentional about investment. So as Excel and Centerpoint are creating incentive programs, rebate programs, can we get them to really target them to those low wealth communities, to the folks that haven't typically had access? And I'm talking both about low income homeowners, but also owners of rental property that serve low income households and communities. And I think there's an opportunity here to both use regulatory services at the City of Minneapolis to be sort of the stick to raise the bar on energy efficiency within rental units. But there's also an opportunity, I think, to really think about what are some incentives that cause landlords, who are, after all, just business and people. They're not in it, you know, because they care about communities or because they, you know, want to house low-income folks necessarily. Some do, but creating some incentives, some carrots for folks to think about how can they improve their units, convert their heating systems from electric to natural gas in a way that doesn't just, you know, enrich them, but actually has benefits, tangible benefits to the folks that are living in those units. So that was one of my thoughts. I feel a little bit, I'm going to look at some of these other questions. I think the sort of connection between housing sustainability and racial justice, I think you showed very well in the maps. I think it's important to broaden this idea of investment in low-income communities beyond just the idea of energy efficiency. That's a key critical component around affordability on an ongoing basis. But so too are things like what kind of building materials are used, how often do you need to replace the roof or the siding or whatnot. And then in terms of gentrification and displacement as the housing market improves, you know, there are, I think, again, opportunities. There are existing models out there. There's the land trust model, which ensures that to the extent that there are public subsidies going into housing, that housing remains affordable over time. But again, I think there's some opportunities to be creative as we think about partnerships with the utility companies and city investment, to say to some of these private landlords, you know, we're going to give you this carrot to improve your property, but in exchange for that, we'd like to see some affordability built into that, so that in exchange for this carrot that we're going to give you, you agree to make your units affordable for the next 10 or 15 years. I think there's some really creative ideas that exist out there, and that with this new initiative at the city and the partnership and the energy around these issues, a great opportunity to think about this question differently, so that at some point we have a map that looks different, that energy costs and housing costs become more progressive in terms of how much of your money you get to keep and how much you're spending on housing and energy. So I think that's it.